This is the female-based character for the Astronaut 3 game. This video is going to go over just how I did the low poly texturing and how I did rigging multiple meshes. So the helmet is pretty simple. I just have a separate transparent PNG file and just use that with my UV map. So all the different colored glasses are just different colors that are transparent. The rest of the coloring was all pretty straightforward. All my UVs were just mapped to texture squares, or just mapped out to squares. I didn't care about the actual shape of the face. And then I just used each of the squares over a color palette. And so wherever you put the UV face, that's what color you got for the materials. It's all flat colored, and then I'm just letting lighting do what lighting does for the shading. So the color palettes here can be consistent throughout the entire game, but still varied. So every astronaut could have, in theory, a different color uniform, but they wouldn't actually break the color palette or the tone of the game. That's something that to me was very important, was the overall visual cohesiveness. I think here I'm highlighting all the different meshes that are actually in the model. There's gloves, the jacket, the actual base, there's boots, the helmet, collar, and the backpack. All those are mapped to the same armature. So I'm using the human meta rig from Blender, and it's just the basic one. The full human rig has fingers and toes, jaw and facial expressions and stuff that I'm just not worried about at this stage. So the basic rig suits everything I really need to be doing, especially since my character doesn't have a face or toes. We'll worry about hands later. So bringing in the basic human rig, the first task is basically to fit it to the mesh and to fit the mesh to the rig. So what I'm doing now is aligning the bones in the rig to the shape of the mesh before I map the mesh to the rig. And so I go into local mode with just the two objects I'm working with selected, and it just makes it visually cleaner to set up. I'm going to start with the more obvious out of place pieces, which are the arms. And really it's just about making sure that the joints on the bones align with visually where your joints would be on your mesh. Shoulder with the shoulder, the elbow with the elbow, the wrist should be at the wrist joint. And this part isn't that difficult. It's just time consuming. It's important that you look at this from all your views so that you know how all your bones are actually lining up. And I got lucky here with just how close everything was right from the beginning. There was very little body restructuring to do. And then a big part of just mapping the mesh to the armature is making sure that your vertex groups have the exact same names as your bones do. So this part is really repetitive and time consuming. I think I have it on 8 by speed or 4 by speed. And it's just creating vertex groups for every bone in the armature. So work up one leg, work up the other leg, through the hips, the spine, and so forth. Working through the area that's the shoulders, upper spine, the neck, and the upper arms. There's a lot going on in that area of the mesh. I find it's less important exactly how the mapping goes, but more important that it's symmetrical left to right. So if you have a certain number of faces on the left side selected for the shoulder, those mirroring faces should be selected for the right shoulder. And that's true for the upper arm and the way that the shoulders meet the spine. If they're not symmetrical, just a character doing something with their left hand or their right hand would have different deformations in the mesh. So as long as your shoulder bones are mapped symmetrically, I think it's more important than exactly what faces are mapped to the shoulder bones in the mesh. So I spent a lot of time matching these up, these weird shapes, because I wanted them to be symmetrical. Alright, now that all the vertex groups are created for the mesh, I can grab any of the bones and basically have my mesh rigged at this point. So I can grab the armature from anywhere. It seems like everything mapped correctly. I didn't miss any faces. That's really all I'm looking for at this point, to see if you get any stuck triangles. It just means that one of those vertices wasn't put in a group correctly, or you misnamed a group. But so far so good. So now the next step is going to be to switch meshes and rinse and repeat that whole process for each mesh that we want wrapped to that armature. So even in the jacket, it's important that you follow the entire armature. So here, as low as the jacket is, I'm adding left and right pelvis, lower spine. But it's important that the entire, because if the bottom of the jacket isn't mapped to the pelvis and you move the character's legs and they take a step forward to walk, the jacket stays behind. Or sticks to the spine, which is bent at a different angle for running or something like that, and you get a lot of clipping. So I try to just follow the entire body of the mesh, the same way I did with the base mesh. That's true for the jacket. Any additional outside leg protection or armor that you would have. In this case for me, it's the jacket, the glove, the boots, and the ceiling collar for the helmet. So in this case, I'm just going through and doing all the exact same node mappings that I did for the base mesh, and it's the same process. You know, grab the faces that you want to grab, create your node group, assign the faces to the node group, name the node group, and then move on to the next node group. The same attention to the detail in the shoulders of the jacket. I mean, as long as they're symmetrical, I think it's less important that this mesh selection matches the mesh selection underneath. The armature and the way that Blender handles the actual rigging, it seems to be more based on the distance to the bone. So even if vertices don't line up, as long as they're parallel with one another, like in distance from the bone, they seem to hold that really well. So in this case, it seems like because the jacket wraps the base model and there's that air gap between the two meshes, Blender seems to do a really, really good job of maintaining that air gap through all the deformations. So as the character is running around, I don't see the base mesh poking through at all. It's just really well done. All right, now that we're done the vertex grouping, the jacket and the base mesh should move when I find the right arm bone to pose. There's so many better ways to be doing this. Just was not thinking at the time. I'm realizing I didn't apply the armature modifier to the jacket. There, the jacket and the base mesh are moving together. And so, again, for every mesh that I do that to, we'll stick to the armature, and the whole model moves as a cohesive unit. I think that's about all I have for this video. Thanks.